When you think about the big names in early Islamic history, your mind usually goes to a certain type of person.
Hmm. The generals, the caliphs.
Exactly, the men drawing lines on maps, the ones holding a sword or a scepter. But today we're doing something, well, something completely different. We're looking at a man who wasn't a general, wasn't a caliph. For the most important decade of his life, he was a servant.
And yet, if you took this one person out of the historical record, a huge, a truly massive chunk of what we know about the Prophet Muhammad would just disappear. We're talking about Anas bin Malik.
Anas bin Malik. And we really need to set the stakes here from the get-go. This isn't just a biography of a guy who fetched water. We're looking at the man who is responsible for the third largest body of hadith, prophetic traditions in all of Islamic history.
The number is 2,286 narrations.
That's just a staggering amount of data to come from a single source.
It is. And that volume is exactly why this deep dive is, well, it's going to be a stress test. We're not just retelling his life story. We're essentially putting his memory on trial. Because Anas gives us this unique domestic view.
The behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly. How the prophet ate, slept, groomed himself. But to trust that view, you have to navigate three really different and often conflicting perspectives. The traditional Sunni reverence, the sharp Shia critique, and a more modern secular analysis that calls into question the nature of human memory itself.
I like that framing, a stress test of the source.
Okay.
Because if Anas is reliable, we get this incredibly intimate portrait. If he's not, a lot of what we think of as everyday Islam is on shaky ground.
Precisely. And the controversy starts right at the very beginning of his life. You have to get the timeline. Anas's life covers this entire human spectrum in a way almost no other companion does. He starts as a child in the Prophet's household and ends his life as a centenarian.
Over 100 years old.
Yeah, the last living link to the Prophet in the city of Basra.
So you've got the child and the very old man. Two stages of life that are, notoriously difficult when it comes to reliable memory. Let's start with the boy.
Okay, so the biographical context. Anas was born around 612 CE. He's from the Banu Najjar clan, which is important because they were maternal relatives of the Prophet, so there was already a family connection.
Right.
When the Prophet migrates to Medina, Anas is about 10 years old. And his mother, Salam, she brings him to the Prophet and basically says, "Here's my son, let him serve you."
So from age 10 to 20, for that entire decade, he is the personal servant. He's in the house.
He is everywhere. He's fetching water for ablution, carrying sandals. He's the fly on the wall for 10 years straight.
Okay, but this is where I have to, play the skeptic. A 10-year-old boy, I can barely remember what I learned in 5th grade, let alone recall it with the kind of precision needed for legal rulings. Can we really trust a kid to memorize things that will shape a global religion?
And that is the childhood amnesia debate. It's the first big hurdle. Modern psychology tells us that our memory before age 10 is spotty at best. And even as a teenager, memory is reconstructive. So secular historians look at Anas and they ask a very pointed question. Are these real memories, or are we looking at retrojective attribution?
Retrojective attribution? Whoa, okay, that's a heavy academic term. Break that down for us in, plain English.
It's the theory that later communities sort of projected their current realities back into the past. So imagine a legal debate pops up in the year 700 about, say, a specific prayer ritual. To win that argument, you need an authority. And who's a better authority than the boy who was always there? So the theory is that these complex legal ideas were put into Anas's mouth retroactively. He was a convenient vessel.
So it's not that Anas was lying, necessarily, but that history kind of used him like a ventriloquist's dummy.
That's the critical view, yes.
Yeah.
That he became a symbol, a stamp of approval for later ideas.
So how does traditional scholarship push back against that? They can't just ignore the fact he was a kid.
They don't. They frame it through culture and neuroplasticity. They argue that the ages of 10 to 20 are actually the biological peak for memory formation. And you have to remember the context. This was an oral culture.
Right. They weren't writing everything down.
No. Kids weren't memorizing video game cheats. They were memorizing thousands of lines of poetry, entire tribal genealogies. The capacity for memory was just different.
And there was a prayer, right? The Prophet supposedly made a specific prayer for him.
Yes, that's the more spiritual defense. The Prophet prayed for him, "O Allah, increase him in wealth and children, and bless him in what you give him." And for traditionalists, his long life and his incredible recall are seen as a direct result of that prayer.
But there's a difference in what he's remembering, isn't there? Remembering a complex legal theory is one thing. Remembering, I don't know, how someone combed their hair is another.
And that is the crucial counter-argument to the skeptics. When you actually look at what Anas narrates, a huge chunk of it is not abstract theology. It's observational.
The homely details.
Exactly. He tells us about the prophet's favorite foods, he tells us about lice, and he has that famous line, "I served the prophet for 10 years, and he never once said uff to me."
Huff being sort of like a sigh of annoyance.
Right, no uff, no why did you do this or why didn't you do that? It paints this picture of incredible patience.
But that, to me, that raises another red flag. I'd call it the servant's dilemma. Does the servant see the master most clearly, or does their reverence paint a picture that's just too perfect? I mean, no F in 10 years. It sounds beautiful, but it also sounds a bit like hagiography, like he's polishing the image of his hero.
And that's the tension. For a believer, that detail proves the prophet's perfect character. For a critical historian, it looks like an idealized projection. But here's the thing, Anas also narrates the messy stuff.
Like what?
He narrates the prophet forgetting things in prayer, or being physically injured. If he was just trying to build this perfect superhuman myth, why would you include the moments of human vulnerability?
That's a fair point. If you're building a myth, you usually edit out the stumbling blocks. Okay, so the boy grows up. The prophet passes away when Anas is around 20. But he doesn't just fade away, he moves to Basra.
And this brings us to part 2, the centenarian. This is where the historical problems really start to pile up. Anas lives to be about 103 years old. He dies around the year 712 CE.
So he outlives the prophet by 80 years.
80 years. It's a whole other lifetime. And that creates what we could call the 90-year problem. We know about cognitive decline. We know about senility. How reliable is a memory being recalled 80 years after the fact, mostly without written notes from the time?
And this goes back to the volume issue. 2,286 hadiths. That's more than Abu Bakr, more than Umar. These were the prophet's best friends. How does the servant out-narrate the statesman?
The standard answer is pretty simple. Longevity plus teaching. Abu Bakr died just 2 years after the prophet. He didn't have time to sit and hold teaching circles. Abu Bakr's had an 80-year teaching window. People flocked to him. He was the last living link.
If you wanted to know what the prophet did, you went to Anas.
He was the only game in town.
But there's more critical theory here too, isn't there? Something called attribution creep.
Yeah, attribution creep is the idea that the Basran school of scholars, Anas's students, might have used his name like a prestigious brand name.
A label.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you're a scholar in Basra and you have a legal opinion, attributing it to Anas bin Malik gives it bulletproof authority. So it's possible that Anas said just became a generic stamp of approval for local traditions, whether he really said them or not.
That sounds like a nightmare for anyone trying to figure out what's authentic. How could you possibly verify what the old man actually said versus what people claimed he said?
Well, the traditional system wasn't naive. They had the isnad, the chain of transmission. They relied heavily on his top students, guys like Qatada and Thabit al-Bunani. These students acted as filters, as living documentation. If some random person came along with a wild story from Anas, they would check it against what Qatada or Thabit had reported.
But did the system actually work? Did they ever catch a mistake?
They did. And this is a really important example. There's a specific narration known as the 90-year-old fornicator hadith.
Okay, what on earth is that?
Anas reportedly narrated a ruling that if an old man commits fornication, he should be stoned, but a young man should only be flogged. This completely contradicts standard Islamic law.
Which is based on marital status, not age.
Correct. So what did the scholars do? Did they just accept him because Anas said so?
I'm guessing not.
No. Even the Sunni scholars who revered him rejected it. They classified it as mursal, or abrogated, basically saying the attribution was faulty or it was a misunderstanding. This proves they weren't just rubber stamping everything, they were critiquing him.
That actually gives me more confidence in the system, knowing that they were willing to throw some things out. But we can't talk about Basra without talking politics. It wasn't exactly a peaceful retirement community.
Not at all. Basra was a pressure cooker. And this leads us right into the Shia critique, which is probably the most intense lens on Anas. He lived through the civil wars, the fitna. He lived under the Umayyad dynasty, and specifically under the brutal governor Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf.
Al-Hajjaj. Yeah, even if you don't know the history, that name just sounds ominous.
He's the archetype of the tyrant in Islamic history. So the Shia critique of Anas is mostly political. They see him as politically quietist.
Meaning he didn't pick a side.
Worse, They accuse him of not openly supporting Ali ibn Abi Talib during the civil wars, and by staying quiet, he was in effect supporting the Umayyads.
So the charge is that he sold out, traded his integrity to stay safe.
That's the accusation. But you have to look at his situation. Al-Hajjaj famously threatened Anas directly. He told him to his face, "I will destroy you just like how a sheep is destroyed."
Wow. Okay, so when a guy threatens to slaughter you like livestock, keeping your mouth shut feels, well, it feels like a survival instinct, not an ideological betrayal.
That's the defense. It's called isma, or self-protection. He stayed neutral to survive and keep teaching. But for the Shia perspective, there is one incident that crosses the line from survival into betrayal. The incident at the Mosque of Kufa, concerning the memory of Ghadir Khumm.
And Ghadir Khumm is where the Prophet supposedly designated Ali as his successor. It's the foundational event for Shia Islam.
Correct. The story goes that years later, Ali, now as caliph, is facing opposition. He stands up in the mosque and asks the companions in the crowd to testify if they heard the Prophet appoint him a Ghadir. Several companions stand up. Anas bin Malik stays seated.
And Ali calls him out on it.
Yes, Ali asks him directly, "Why don't you testify you were there?" And Anas's reply was, "O Commander of the Faithful, I have grown old and I have forgotten."
I forgot. Wow. That is a very convenient answer.
That's exactly how it's viewed, as a malicious concealment of the truth. And the story then gets very supernatural. It's claimed that Ali, in that moment, cursed Anas. He prayed, "If you are lying, may Allah strike you with a whiteness that your turban cannot hide."
And did it happen?
According to the story, yes. Anas supposedly developed vitiligo, a white patch on his face, which he had for the rest of his life. For his critics, this was the physical brand of his betrayal.
That is heavy. Is there any defense against that story? Or is it just a he said, she said situation?
There are defenses. Sunni scholars argue that the chains of transmission for the cursed story are weak, likely invented later. But more importantly, they point to something called the bird hadith.
The bird hadith.
It's a narration where the prophet is eating a bird, and he prays, "Allah, bring me the most beloved of your creation to eat this bird with me." And who walks in?
Let me guess. Ali.
Ali.
Yeah.
And who narrated this entire story? Anas bin Malik.
Wait a minute. So if Anas was part of some grand conspiracy to hide Ali's virtues, why on earth would he narrate a story that explicitly calls Ali the most beloved of creation?
Exactly. It's a huge contradiction.
Yeah.
It suggests that his silence at Kufa, if it even happened that way, might have been about specific wording or political caution, not some deep-seated hatred of Ali.
It sounds like he was a man trying to walk a very thin line between warring factions.
He was a survivor. And survivors often have to make messy compromises.
Speaking of messy, we have to pivot. We've done the heavy politics, the memory science, but when I was reading the source material for this, I came across some stuff that is just weird.
The weird hadiths.
Yes. I mean, narrations from Anas that make modern readers really uncomfortable, and I think we have to address the elephant, or maybe the camel in the room, the camel urine hadith.
The Shuraina hadith, it's infamous. Anas narrates that a group of people got sick in Medina, and the Prophet advised them to drink the milk and the urine of camels as medicine.
And I can literally hear our listeners cringing right now. It sounds absurd. It sounds gross.
It does to us, absolutely. And modern critics use this constantly as an attack. But we have to check our chronological snobbery. Historically, camel urine was a standard remedy in the Near East for centuries for things like dropsy and abdominal swelling.
So it wasn't a religious ritual. It was just a prescription.
It was medicine. It wasn't a holy beverage. But because it gets recorded in a religious text, it gets frozen in time and looks very strange to us later.
Then there's the one about sexual strength. Anas narrates that the Prophet had the strength of 30 men and would visit all his wives in a single night.
Another flashpoint.
Yeah, because to a modern ear, that can sound like objectification or, toxic masculinity.
Critics see it as myth-making, turning the Prophet into this superhuman figure. But again, you have to look through the cultural lens of the time. Virility wasn't seen as crass. It was a sign of robust health and physical perfection. For Anas, this was a way of praising the Prophet's total completeness.
It's amazing how the exact same text can be read as objectification by one group and a sign of perfection by another.
It all depends on the lens you bring to it. And then finally, you have the miracles. My favorite is the weeping palm trunk.
Oh, this one is so surreal. I love it.
It is, isn't it? The Prophet used to lean on a palm trunk when he gave his sermons, and they built him a proper pulpit, so he stopped using the tree. And Anas narrates that the tree started moaning.
Not creaking, moaning.
Moaning like a camel that's been separated from his calf. And it supposedly didn't stop until the prophet went over and hugged it.
A crying tree. Now, a rationalist scholar would look at that and say, come on, that's folklore. Trees don't have vocal cords.
They would. They'd call it munker reprehensible, impossible. But for the traditionalist, this is a proof of prophethood. And think about who narrated it. Anas, the servant, the boy who was an observer of the intimate domestic life. It makes perfect sense that he would be the one to notice the emotions of the scene, even the emotions of an inanimate object.
It fits his profile, doesn't it? He's the guy who notices the prophet never said uff.
Yeah.
He's the guy who hears the tree cry.
It's the thread that ties so much of it together.
Okay, so let's try to pull all of this together. We've looked at the boy, the centenarian, the political survivor, the narrator of the supernatural. Anas bin Malik is just. He's an incredibly complicated figure.
He is the paradigmatic case for hadith criticism. If you want to understand how this whole field works, you have to study Anas. He embodies every single tension.
Child versus adult, memory versus senility, political survival versus moral integrity.
All of it. If you ask a Sunni scholar, Anas is a pillar of the religion, a man whose long life was a divine blessing. If you ask a Shia critic, he's a compromised figure who hid the truth to save his own skin. If you ask a modern critical historian, he's a projection screen, a Bazran label used to legitimize later laws.
He's a mirror. He reflects whatever the person looking at him wants to see.
He is. But I want to leave you with one final thought. We've been calling this the servant's dilemma. We assume that being close to someone, living with them, seeing them every single day, gives us the most accurate picture of who they were. We think intimacy equals truth.
What?
But does it? Or does that extreme intimacy, when it's combined with immense love and reverence, does it inevitably color the memory? Does love clarify the image? Or does it actually blind you?
That is the question. When we read a narration from Anas, are we seeing the prophet as he truly was? Or are we seeing the prophet through the adoring eyes of the 10-year-old boy who served him?
And can we ever really know the difference?
I don't think we can, and that's what makes his legacy so endlessly fascinating. We'll leave it there for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.